The howling wind cut through the Montana territory like a knife, piercing through Faith Fletcher's threadbare coat as she trudged forward, her boots sinking into snow that had fallen continuously for 3 days. Her fingers, wrapped in torn gloves, clutched the reins of her exhausted mare, the last possession she had left after the stagecoach robbery that had claimed everything else, including her last $5 and the address of her cousin in Helena. December 1876 was proving to be the cruelest month Faith had ever known. At 22, she had already weathered the loss of her parents to influenza in Philadelphia and the subsequent discovery that her father's business partner had embezzled their family fortune. The journey west was supposed to be her fresh start, not her demise. "Just a little further, Belle," Faith whispered to her horse, though she had no idea where further led. The sun was setting, the temperature dropping, and the landmarks had disappeared beneath the blanket of white. Her lips were cracked, her face numb, and the terrible realization that she might freeze to death in this vast emptiness began to take hold. As darkness descended, Faith spotted a faint golden glow in the distance. Hope surged through her veins, propelling her forward. It grew larger, clearer, a window lit by lamplight. A cabin, sturdy and smoke rising from its chimney, emerged from the snowscape like a miracle. Faith slid from her horse, her legs nearly giving way as they hit the ground. She staggered to the door, raised a trembling hand, and knocked with what little strength remained. The door swung open, revealing a tall man silhouetted against the warm glow behind him. His features came into focus, strong jaw shadowed with stubble, piercing blue eyes that narrowed with suspicion, and broad shoulders that filled the doorframe. "Please," Faith managed, her voice barely audible above the wind. "My horse and I, we need shelter. I've been robbed and I'm lost." The man studied her for a long moment, taking in her snow-crusted clothes, her pale face, and the desperation in her eyes. Then his gaze shifted to the mare standing forlornly behind her. "Get your horse to the stable round back," he said, his voice deep and rough from disuse. "Then come inside. There's stew on the stove." Faith nearly collapsed with relief. "Thank you, I don't know how to repay, no need for that," he cut her off, then softened slightly. "My cabin is yours forever if you need it. No one should be out in this weather." She led Belle around to the small stable attached to the cabin, where a chestnut gelding nickered softly in greeting. Faith removed the saddle with stiff fingers and rubbed Belle down with straw, ensuring her horse was comfortable before attending to her own desperate needs. When Faith finally entered the cabin, warmth enveloped her like an embrace. The single-room dwelling was neat and sparse. A cast-iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner, and a rocking chair near the fireplace where flames danced cheerfully. "Nate Reynolds," the man said, ladling stew into a bowl. "Most folks call me Nate." "Faith Fletcher," she replied, her teeth chattering as she approached the fire. "I was headed to Helena to my cousin's. Stagecoach was robbed yesterday at the crossing. They took everything except Belle." Nate placed the bowl on the table along with a chunk of bread. "Eat, then you can tell me the rest." Faith didn't need to be told twice. She fell upon the food, a rich venison stew with potatoes and carrots, while Nate busied himself with stoking the fire and bringing a kettle to boil. "Those would be the Blackwell gang," he said as he poured her a cup of coffee. "They've been hitting the Helena stage for months now. Sheriff can't catch 'em." Faith paused, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "You think they'll be caught? My money is gone," Nate finished for her. "Best accept that now." He sat across from her, his own coffee untouched. "How far's your cousin's place?" 20 miles outside Helena, according to her letter, the Rocking F Ranch. Faith's shoulders slumped, "But I don't even have the letter anymore." Nate's expression remained stoic, but his eyes revealed a flicker of compassion. "I know the Rocking F. Frank Fulton's place, about 60 miles northwest of here." Hope rekindled in Faith's chest. "You know my cousin?" "Know of him, never met the man himself." Nate took a sip of his coffee. "Storm's set to last 3, maybe 4 more days. Roads won't be passable for at least a week after that." Faith's hope dimmed. "A week, at least." Nate stood and moved to a trunk near the bed. He pulled out a blanket and pillow. "You take the bed, I'll make do by the fire." I couldn't possibly. You can and you will, he said firmly. You're half frozen and exhausted. I'm used to rough sleeping. As Faith finished her meal, she took the opportunity to study her rescuer. Nathan Reynolds was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 28 or 30. His dark hair fell just past his collar, and while his clothes were well worn, they were clean. His hands, large and calloused, spoke of hard work, but they moved with a surprising grace as he arranged his makeshift bed. How long have you lived out here? Faith asked, trying to keep her eyes open despite the warm food and fire making her drowsy. 5 years. Nate didn't elaborate. Alone, he glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Yep, don't you get lonely? A muscle twitched in his jaw. Got my horses, got my books. He nodded toward a small shelf containing a dozen or so volumes. Got peace and quiet. Faith sensed she'd touched a nerve and changed the subject. Thank you for taking me in. I don't know what would have happened if no need to think on that, Nate interrupted. Get some rest, Miss Fletcher. Things usually look better in the morning. Faith wanted to protest that she wasn't tired, that she could help clean up, but her body betrayed her. She barely remembered crossing to the bed, removing her boots and sliding under the covers before sleep claimed her. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. Morning light filtered through the cabin's single window, revealing a world still blanketed in white. Nate stood at the stove, his back to her, humming a tune she didn't recognize. Good morning, Faith said, her voice hoarse from sleep. Nate turned, spatula in hand. Thought you might sleep through to supper. It's nearly noon. Faith sat up abruptly. Noon, I never sleep past dawn. Body takes what it needs, Nate replied, sliding eggs onto a plate alongside the bacon. Especially after what you went through, how are you feeling? Faith took inventory, her muscles ached and her face felt tender where the wind had chapped it, but otherwise she felt remarkably well. Much better, thank you. Good, he set the plate on the table. Eat up, then we'll check on your mare. Faith washed her face in the basin by the door, ran fingers through her tangled auburn hair and joined Nate at the table. She noticed he'd already eaten and was nursing a cup of coffee. You always feed strangers who knock on your door? She asked between bites. Only the ones half dead from cold, he answered with the barest hint of a smile. Well, I'm grateful. Faith paused, considering her situation. Mr. Reynolds, Nate, I have no money to pay you for your hospitality, but I'm not without skills. I can cook, clean, mend. I'd like to earn my keep while I'm here. Nate studied her for a long moment. Don't need a housekeeper. Faith's cheeks flushed. I didn't mean to imply, but he continued, wood needs chopping, horses need tending, and I won't turn down help with the cooking. We'll call it even. Relief washed over her. Thank you. After breakfast, they ventured out to the stable. The snow had stopped, but the sky remained heavy with clouds promising more to come. Belle nickered when she saw Faith, nuzzling her shoulder in greeting. She's a fine horse, Nate commented, running a hand down the mare's neck. Arabian, quarter horse with some Arabian, according to my father. Faith stroked Belle's nose. She was his last gift to me before he died. Nate nodded, understanding in his eyes. She'll be good company for Rusty here. He patted the chestnut gelding, and Thunder. He indicated a magnificent black stallion in the end stall who watched them warily. He's beautiful, Faith breathed, and knows it, Nate said with a small chuckle. Too smart for his own good, that one. They fed and watered the horses, then Nate showed Faith around the property, a quick tour given the weather. The cabin sat in a small clearing surrounded by pines, with a creek running nearby, now frozen over. A lean-to housed firewood, tools, and a few animal traps. Beyond that, the forest stretched in all directions, with mountains rising in the distance. It's peaceful, Faith said as they returned to the cabin. That's why I'm here. Nate stamped snow from his boots before entering. Left Virginia after the war, needed space to breathe. It was the most he'd revealed about himself since her arrival, and Faith treaded carefully. You fought in the war between the states, cavalry, Confederate. His tone indicated the subject was closed. Inside, Nate taught Faith how to operate the cast iron stove and showed her where he kept his modest supplies. By unspoken agreement, they settled into a routine. Nate handled the outside chores while Faith tended to the cabin, preparing meals and mending a shirt she found with a torn sleeve. As dusk fell, snow began to fall again, thick and heavy. Nate returned from checking the horses, bringing a blast of cold air with him. "Storm's picking up," he announced, hanging his coat by the door. "Might be worse than I thought." Faith looked up from the pot of beans she was stirring. "How bad?" "Bad enough that even if the stage were running, you wouldn't want to be on it." He crossed to the fireplace and added another log. "Looks like you're stuck with me a while longer, Miss Fletcher." "Faith," she corrected, "and I'm not sure stuck is the right word." "You've been nothing but kind." Nate's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement, perhaps, that they were no longer merely strangers thrown together by circumstance. That evening, they ate by firelight, and Faith convinced Nate to read aloud from one of his books, a collection of Tennyson's poems. His voice, deep and steady, gave new life to the familiar verses, and Faith found herself watching his face as he read, noting how the firelight softened his features and brought warmth to his blue eyes. When he finished, he looked up to find her gazing at him. "What?" he asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing," Faith said quickly. "You read beautifully, I wouldn't have expected." A rough cowboy to appreciate poetry. There was no anger in his voice, only amusement. Faith smiled. "I was going to say, I wouldn't have expected to find such comfort in a stranger's cabin in the middle of nowhere." Nate's expression sobered. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it?" "Indeed it does," Faith agreed, thinking of how her own life had veered so dramatically from its expected course. That night, despite Faith's protests, Nate again insisted she take the bed while he slept by the fire. As she drifted off, listening to the wind howl outside and the occasional crackle of the fire, Faith realized she felt safer in this remote cabin with a man she barely knew than she had in months. Days passed, falling into a comfortable rhythm. The storm continued, occasionally abating enough for Nate to hunt or check his traps, but mostly keeping them confined to the cabin. They talked haltingly at first, then with increasing ease. Faith told Nate about Philadelphia, her parents' deaths, and her journey west. Nate shared bits and pieces of his own story. His childhood on a small farm in Virginia, the war that took his father and brother, his westward journey in search of solitude. On the fourth day, while Nate was out checking the horses, Faith found a guitar tucked behind the trunk near the bed. When Nate returned, she held it up questioningly. "Do you play?" she asked. Nate hesitated, then nodded. "Used to, haven't much lately." "Would you?" Faith extended the instrument to him. "I'd love to hear it." Nate took the guitar, his fingers trailing over the worn wood with familiar affection. He sat in the rocking chair, tuned the strings with practiced ease, and began to play. The melody was simple but haunting, and when he began to sing a ballad about a soldier far from home, Faith felt tears spring to her eyes. His voice was unexpectedly tender, carrying emotion he seemed unable to express in conversation. When the song ended, silence hung between them, heavy with unspoken feelings. "That was beautiful," Faith finally said. Nate set the guitar aside. "My mother taught me. She said music heals what medicine can't reach." She was wise. She was. Nate stood abruptly. "Need to bring in more firewood before dark." As he left, Faith realized she was beginning to care for this solitary cowboy with his hidden depths and carefully guarded heart. The thought both thrilled and frightened her. In a week, perhaps less if the weather cleared, she would leave for her cousin's ranch. This interlude, this unexpected sanctuary, would become just a memory. That evening, as they sat before the fire, Nate broke their companionable silence. "Why were you heading to your cousin's?" Faith poked at the embers with the iron. "After my parents died, there was nothing left for me in Philadelphia. Frank, my cousin, wrote that I could have a fresh start at the Rocking F. He and his wife have no children and they need help with the house and accounts." "And that's what you want, to keep house for your cousin?" The question caught Faith off guard. I haven't had the luxury of wanting things. I need security, a roof over my head." Nate nodded, his expression thoughtful. "There's nothing wrong with that, but a woman like you." "A woman like me," Faith prompted when he trailed off. "Smart, capable, brave enough to travel west on your own." Nate's eyes held hers. "Seems like you could do whatever you set your mind to." Warmth spread through Faith's chest at his words. Thank you for saying that. The truth is, I don't know what I want beyond survival. I haven't allowed myself to dream much since my parents died. Maybe it's time to start. The following morning, Faith awoke to find Nate already gone, a note on the table saying he'd gone hunting and would return by midday. The sky outside was clear for the first time in days, the sun turning the snow-covered landscape into a sea of diamonds. Faith tended to the horses, cleaned the cabin, and prepared a venison stew for when Nate returned. As she worked, she found herself humming the melody he'd played on the guitar, her thoughts continually returning to their conversation by the fire. What did she want, beyond simple survival? The question haunted her. Nate returned earlier than expected, a brace of rabbits in hand and news that the main road showed signs of recent passage. Stage might be running again in a few days, he said as he skinned the rabbits outside. Faith's heart sank at the thought, surprising her with its intensity. That's good news, Nate glanced at her, his expression unreadable. Reckon it is. That afternoon, they preserved the rabbit meat together, working side by side in comfortable silence. Occasionally, their hands would brush, sending unexpected shivers up Faith's arm. She found herself studying Nate when he wasn't looking, the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the strong line of his jaw, the gentleness in his hands despite their roughness. As dusk approached, Nate suggested they take advantage of the clear weather for a short ride. "There's something I'd like to show you," he said, already saddling Thunder and Rusty, having decided Belle deserved more rest. They rode through the forest, Nate leading the way along a path only he could see. The snow crunched beneath the horses' hooves, and their breath formed clouds in the cold air. After about 20 minutes, they emerged onto a ridge overlooking a vast valley. The setting sun painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, with long purple shadows stretching across the pristine white. Mountains rose in the distance, majestic and eternal. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Faith whispered, awestruck. "This is why I stay," Nate said quietly. "When everything else seems dark or confusing, this reminds me that there's still beauty in the world." Faith turned to look at him, finding his gaze already on her. Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, that they had both found something unexpected in each other's company. "Thank you for sharing this with me," Faith said softly. Nate nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Thank you for wanting to see it." They returned to the cabin as stars began to appear in the clear sky, a comfortable silence between them. As they cared for the horses together, their movements fell into an easy harmony, as if they'd been doing this together for years rather than days. Inside, they ate the stew Faith had prepared, talking of inconsequential things, books they'd read, places they'd seen, foods they missed from their childhoods. When the meal was done, Nate surprised Faith by pulling out a small chess set from his trunk. "Do you play?" he asked, setting up the pieces on the table. Faith smiled. "My father taught me. He said it built character." "Mine said the same." Nate's eyes crinkled at the corners, "though I suspect he just liked beating me." They played 2 games, each winning one, their competitive spirits well matched. During the 3rd game, as Faith contemplated her move, she felt Nate's gaze on her face. "What?" she asked, looking up. "Just thinking that your cousin Frank is a lucky man to have you coming to help him." Faith's heart beat faster at the intensity in his eyes. "I'm not sure I'm going." The words surprised them both. "What do you mean?" Nate asked carefully. Faith's fingers hovered over her knight. "I've been thinking about what you said about allowing myself to want things, and I'm not sure that keeping house for my cousin is what I want." "What do you want, Faith?" She met his gaze steadily. "I'm still figuring that out, but I know I want more than what I was settling for." Nate reached across the chessboard and took her hand. His touch was warm, sending a cascade of sensations through Faith's body. "Whatever you decide," he said, his voice low, "know that my offer stands. My cabin is yours forever if you need it." Faith turned her hand to clasp his. "And if I want it, not just need it," Nate's breath caught, "that would be a different conversation entirely." The air between them charged with possibility, and Faith knew they stood at a crossroads. She could release his hand, finish the game, and maintain the safe distance between them. Or she could acknowledge the feelings that had been growing since the moment he opened his door to her. She chose the latter. "I think I'd like to have that conversation," she said softly. Nate's eyes darkened. He rose from his chair, still holding her hand, and drew her to her feet. They stood facing each other, close enough that Faith could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Faith," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "I've been alone a long time. Thought I preferred it that way, but these past days with you—" "I know," she whispered. "I feel it too." He raised his free hand to her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. "You deserve better than a solitary cowboy with nothing to offer but a small cabin and a hard life." "Let me decide what I deserve," Faith said, covering his hand with hers. "You've shown me nothing but kindness, respect, and honesty since the moment we met. That's worth more than gold to me." Nate's expression softened, hope replacing doubt in his eyes. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips met hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand. Faith answered by sliding her arms around his neck, drawing him closer. His arms encircled her waist, and the kiss deepened, expressing all the words they hadn't yet found. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Nate rested his forehead against hers. "I never expected this," he murmured. "Neither did I," Faith replied with a small laugh. "I was just desperate for shelter." "And you found a home," Nate finished, drawing her back into his embrace. That night, Faith insisted they share the bed, simply to sleep side by side. Nate held her through the night, his arms a shelter more profound than the cabin's sturdy walls. For the first time since her parents' deaths, Faith felt truly safe, truly seen. The morning brought with it a fresh snowfall and new understanding between them. They moved around each other with easy familiarity, stealing kisses and exchanging smiles that spoke of possibilities neither had dared imagine before. After breakfast, Nate took Faith's hands in his. "There's something I need to show you." He led her to his trunk and opened it, removing a false bottom to reveal a hidden compartment. From it, he extracted a small leather pouch. "When I said I had nothing to offer you, that wasn't entirely true," he said, emptying the pouch onto the table. Gold coins, at least 30 of them, gleamed in the morning light. Faith gasped. "Nate, my savings from 5 years of trapping, hunting, and occasionally breaking horses for ranchers in the territory." He looked at her earnestly. "I've been saving for something, though I didn't know what until now." "What are you saying?" Faith asked, though her heart already knew the answer. "I'm saying I want to build a life with you, Faith Fletcher, here or elsewhere if you prefer." "I'm saying I love you, though I know it's fast and maybe foolish." Faith's eyes filled with tears. "It's not foolish. Sometimes the heart knows in an instant what the mind takes years to understand." "Is that a yes?" "It's I love you too, Nathan Reynolds," Faith replied, throwing her arms around him. "And a yes to building a life together." They spent the day making plans, practical discussions of how to expand the cabin, what supplies they would need, whether to raise cattle or focus on horses. Nate revealed that he owned the land outright, having purchased it from a homesteader returning east. "I never thought I'd share it with anyone," he admitted as they sat by the fire that evening, "but now I can't imagine it without you." The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Faith was gathering eggs from the small henhouse Nate maintained when she heard the jingle of harnesses and men's voices. She hurried back to the cabin to find Nate already on the porch, speaking with 3 riders. "Faith," he called as she approached, "these men are from the stage company. They're looking for survivors from the robbery." The lead rider, a weathered man in his 50s, touched his hat to Faith. "Madam, name's Hank Warren, station master from Fort Harrison. Had word from a passenger who got away that there was a young woman on the stage." "That was me," Faith confirmed. "I lost everything except my horse." Hank nodded grimly. "You're luckier than some. 2 passengers killed, driver wounded bad." He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. "Found this near the site. Address caught my eye, being as I know Frank Fulton." Faith took the envelope, recognizing her cousin's letter. "Thank you, Mr. Warren. Stage is running again, heading to Helena tomorrow morning if you want passage," Hank continued. "Company would waive the fare considering." Faith glanced at Nate, who watched her with carefully neutral expression. "That's very kind, but I've decided to stay here." Hank raised an eyebrow, looking between Faith and Nate. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "I see. Well, might be I could get word to Frank for you, let him know you're safe." "I'd appreciate that," Faith said. "Tell him I found something unexpected on my journey west, and I'll visit when the weather's better." After the riders departed, Nate pulled Faith into his arms. "You're sure?" he asked. "About staying?" Faith smiled up at him. "I've never been more sure of anything, but I do think we should visit the Rocking F come spring. Frank is my only family, and I'd like him to meet you." "Whatever you want," Nate agreed, pressing a kiss to her forehead. The following weeks passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. With the weather improving, Nate began cutting logs for the cabin expansion. Faith organized their supplies and started planning a garden for the spring. Together, they ventured to the nearest town, Silver Creek, where Nate introduced Faith to the handful of people he considered friends. At the general store, they purchased fabric for curtains and a new quilt, seeds for the garden, and a simple gold band that Nate slipped onto Faith's finger that evening by firelight, making their engagement official. "It's not fancy," he apologized. "It's perfect," Faith assured him, admiring how it caught the light. "Just like this life we're building." In February, they were married by the circuit preacher who stopped in Silver Creek once a month. The ceremony was small, just a few of Nate's friends as witnesses, but filled with joy. The storekeeper's wife hosted a small reception in their home, where Faith and Nate danced to fiddle music, her head resting on his chest, his arms holding her close. "Happy, Mrs. Reynolds," Nate whispered in her ear. "Incredibly," Faith answered, lifting her face for his kiss. Spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. The cabin addition was completed just in time, as Faith discovered she was expecting their first child. Nate's joy knew no bounds. He swept Faith off her feet when she told him, spinning her around the cabin until they were both dizzy with laughter. "A baby," he kept saying, his hand gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby." In May, they made the journey to the Rocking F Ranch. Frank and his wife Martha welcomed them with open arms, expressing first concern over Faith's ordeal, then delight at her obvious happiness. "I've never seen two people more in love," Martha told Faith as they prepared supper together. "The way Nathan looks at you like you hung the moon and stars." Faith smiled, her hand drifting to her slightly rounded belly. "I feel the same about him. It's strange how life works out, isn't it? If not for the robbery, I might never have met him." "Sometimes our greatest blessings come disguised as our worst days," Martha said wisely. When they shared news of the baby, Frank proposed a toast to the growing family. "To think I worried about you coming west," he said to Faith. "Seems like you found exactly what you needed." "Not what I needed," Faith corrected, her eyes finding Nate's across the table. "What I never knew I wanted." Their journey back to their own home was leisurely, with frequent stops to rest. Nate was solicitous of Faith's comfort, making her laugh with his overprotectiveness. "The baby's not due for another 5 months," she reminded him as he insisted on making camp early one evening. "I'm just making sure my family is taken care of," he replied, his hand covering hers on her growing belly. The word family filled Faith with warmth. From desperate and alone to beloved and part of something larger than herself, the transformation still amazed her. By autumn, the cabin had become a true home. Curtains hung in the windows, the garden had yielded a bountiful harvest, and the nursery Nate had built adjoining their bedroom awaited its occupant. Faith, now in her final month of pregnancy, sat in the rocking chair by the fire, sewing tiny garments while Nate read aloud from one of their books. "I was thinking," he said, setting the book aside, "about names." Faith looked up from her stitching. "Oh. If it's a boy, I'd like to name him after my brother, James." Nate's voice held the familiar mixture of sorrow and affection whenever he spoke of his lost family. "James Reynolds," Faith tested the name. "I like it, and if it's a girl, I thought maybe Eliza after your mother." Tears sprang to Faith's eyes at his thoughtfulness. "Eliza Reynolds, it's beautiful." As it happened, both names would be used. On a snowy December night, almost exactly a year after Faith had stumbled desperate to Nate's door, She gave birth to twins James and Eliza Reynolds, entered the world within minutes of each other, their lusty cries filling the cabin with new life. Nate, who had refused to leave Faith's side despite the midwife's protests, wept unashamedly as he held his son and daughter for the first time. "They're perfect," he whispered, carefully placing them in Faith's waiting arms before sitting beside her on the bed. "Just like their mother." Faith, exhausted but radiant, leaned against his shoulder. "We did it," she murmured. "We made a family. We sure did." Nate pressed a kiss to her temple. "From the moment you knocked on my door, Faith Fletcher, you changed everything. I thought I wanted solitude, but what I really needed was you." Faith smiled down at their sleeping children, "And I thought I was just desperate for shelter." "And I told you my cabin is yours forever," Nate finished, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Best promise I ever made." As snow fell gently outside, coating the world in pristine white just as it had the night they met, Faith and Nate Reynolds sat together on their bed, their newborn twins cradled between them, the fire crackling in the hearth and love filling every corner of the home they had built together. From desperate strangers to beloved family, their journey had only just begun, but the foundation was strong, built on kindness, respect, and a love that had bloomed in the most unexpected of circumstances, proving that sometimes the most desperate moments can lead to the most beautiful destinies. Years passed, and the Reynolds family thrived. The twins grew into sturdy, curious children with their father's blue eyes and their mother's auburn hair. James showed an early affinity for horses, following Nate around the stables from the time he could walk. Eliza preferred the garden and kitchen, helping Faith preserve fruits and vegetables for the winter months. The cabin expanded again to accommodate their growing family. 3 years after the twins, Faith gave birth to another son, Samuel, who had his father's quiet nature and thoughtful demeanor. 2 years later came Catherine, a spirited girl who kept them all on their toes with her adventurous spirit. By 1886, the Reynolds Ranch had grown from Nate's small homestead to a respectable operation with 20 horses, including several of Thunder's offspring and a small herd of cattle. Faith's garden had expanded into a productive plot that supplied not only their family, but also provided access to trade in Silver Creek, which had grown from a small settlement to a proper town with a school, church, and even a small newspaper. On the 10th anniversary of the day they met, Nate surprised Faith with a trip back to the ridge where he had first shown her the valley view. They rode together on a crisp December morning, leaving the children in the care of Martha Fulton, who had come to stay for the winter after Frank's passing the previous spring. The view was as breathtaking as Faith remembered, though now the valley contained more signs of civilization, distant cabins with smoke rising from chimneys, fenced pastures, and the silver ribbon of the stage road winding through the snow. "It's changed," Faith observed as they sat on a fallen log Nate had cleared of snow. "Everything changes," Nate replied, taking her gloved hand in his. "Except how I feel about you. That's only grown stronger with each passing day." Faith leaned into his side, content. "Do you ever regret it?" "Taking in a desperate stranger who appended your solitary life," Nate chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Do you regret knocking on a stranger's door in the middle of a blizzard?" "Never," Faith answered promptly. "Best desperate decision I ever made." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the winter sun glint off the snow-covered landscape. "I have something for you," Nate said eventually, reaching into his coat pocket. He withdrew a small wooden box intricately carved with flowers and vines. "Made it myself." Faith opened it to find a delicate gold locket nestled inside. When she clicked it open, she found a tiny portrait of their family on one side, all 6 of them arranged before the cabin during the summer, and an inscription on the other. "Forever yours, forever mine." "Oh, Nate," Faith breathed, tears springing to her eyes. "It's beautiful." "Had it made in Helena," he explained as he fastened it around her neck. "Wanted you to have something to mark 10 years of the best life a man could ask for." Faith turned in his arms, cupping his face in her hands. Though time had etched a few lines around his eyes and threaded silver through his dark hair, he was still the handsome cowboy who had opened his door to her that fateful night, and his eyes still held the same tenderness when they looked at her. "I love you, Nathan Reynolds," she said softly. "More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." "And I love you, Faith Reynolds," he replied, drawing her close, "forever and always." As they rode home, Faith thought about the journey that had brought them here from a desperate knock on a stranger's door to a life filled with love, children, and the kind of happiness she had once thought beyond her reach. The cabin came into view, smoke rising cheerfully from the chimney, windows glowing with lamplight as dusk fell. Martha would have dinner waiting, the children eager to share their day's adventures. Faith felt Nate's gaze on her and turned to find him watching her with a smile. "Welcome home, Mrs. Reynolds," he said, just as he had on the day they were married. "Home," Faith repeated, the word still holding magic after all these years. "There's no place I'd rather be." And as they rode the final distance to the cabin that had become the heart of their world, Faith knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the most desperate moments could lead to the most beautiful destinies, and that a shelter offered in kindness could truly become a forever home when built on the foundation of love.